War with Iran is looming on the horizon. The empire is seemingly cracking and fractured as it continues to overextend itself. Politicians are, condemning each other and arguing in public more than ever. Elon Musk is melting down on X again. But instead of picking a side or figuring out what more, we have to do to make different political strategies work, some of us libertarians are just grilling. Literally. Today, I'm joined by Chris Spangle to talk about the grill pill. You might have heard of the white pill, the black pill, the red pill, the blue pill, but maybe not the grill pill, a rising mindset that says, well, maybe the best way to fight tyranny is to stop playing their game. Localism, sanity, and, well, brisket. Make America grill again. That's what we're here to talk about tonight, live here in the Green Room. Awesome. Well, welcome, everyone. I'm Jacob Winograd. I am the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, part of our Christians for Liberty network. And as I said, we are streaming to you live in our LCI Green Room. This is our live show that we do typically every Monday evening. For those of you who are new, please make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. If you want to see more conversations like this, or if you want to hold off and make sure that you like the conversation, that's fine too. But if you do like it at any point, now or later in the stream, thumbs up always helps. Sharing it around on social media always helps. And if you're listening to the audio later, we really appreciate those 5-star reviews so that Apple and Spotify and etc. Just promote us more in their algorithms. Tonight, I'm joined, as I said, by Chris Spangle, who hails from the We Are Libertarians podcast network. And Chris, although I've known you a while and we've interacted a lot online, I've never had you on my show. I think we tried a while back and just didn't get our schedules aligned. So this is your first time over here, at least talking to me. I think you've had a conversation with Carrie and Greg of Reformed Libertarians. But for those who are new to you or unfamiliar with you, or know just a little bit, go ahead and give yourself just a little bit of a introduction, your background, your bio, and kind of things you talk about over on your little or not so little
my
big
tiny
and
little show.
You're very old, as we were talking before. You're very old and ancient libertarian.
It really is.
Network.
Yeah, I think now that the Free Talk, I don't know if the Free Talk Live guys are still going or if they've been imprisoned or what, but that if they're not producing new episodes, that would make us, I think, the longest running libertarian podcast since March of 2012 over at the Chris Spangle Show. And boy, what a ride. I started podcasting back in 2007 when I worked at a talk radio show, and then went to work for the Libertarian Party of Indiana from 2008 to 2012. Because as I was working at that talk radio station, I was kind of politically homeless. And then Ron Paul was in the 2008 primaries. And then I was like, oh, that's what I am. I'm a libertarian. Got to know the local libertarians. They needed an executive director. So that was a lot of fun doing that from 2008 to 2012. And during that time, started We Are Libertarians and have continued to do that show for a long time. Long time. I still do it almost weekly. But yeah, I mean, I would say that I'm definitely a libertarian, but I don't know that I care as much as I used to, which is sort of what we're here talking about. And I can get into all that why, but I mean, I think if you listen to my show, sometimes I need to try harder.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so I think I made a post in the anarcho-Christian Facebook group maybe a month or two ago and basically said that I'm about 99% of the way there to say that there is no political solution, quote unquote, that maybe there's still room for local stuff and that maybe that makes a difference on the margins, but just that, I've been involved in the Libertarian Party in different capacities and active in it since 2018, and then really increasing my activity in 2020 with the Mises Caucus and all that. And we don't need to go back and rehash all that history because
you can apologize if you want to. Go ahead. It's fine.
But the but yeah, I think that at this point in this venture, I already kind of knew from my time, and I'd been involved in politics before I was a libertarian. I was a Democrat. I was active in like the Occupy and Bernie bro kind of, grassroots stuff. So I guess you can say I had my short flirtation with, you know, maybe Republicans will actually do what they'll say they'll do this past election cycle, only for me to get Charlie Browned again by Lucy pulling the football out at the last minute. And yeah, I'm not super proud of that, but at the time I thought it was worth the gamble, so to speak. But yeah, I'm kind of like reassessing. I'm like, all right, nothing I've done politically works. I mean, if everything we did had some small role to play in getting Ross Ulbricht free, then hey, I'll at least say it wasn't a total waste. But man, all the hours and time and money and just energy, I'm just like, is that really the best place to put it? But this gets into, like I said in the intro, some people call this perspective that like you don't think that there's a route to political change. They'll say, oh, you're just black pilled, right? You think you can't do anything. Why are people getting that wrong in your by your estimation, right? Why do you think it's black
so let's
pill to
define
say there's
grill
no
pill.
political solution? Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't think there is one, but I don't think that means that we ought to lose hope. So, and let me give you a definition of the grill pill first, because I saw this, I don't know where, but I remember explaining how I felt years ago, and someone said, oh, you're grill pilled. And I never was into the pill thing. But I thought it was a funny thing, so I just sort of adopted it, ironically. But Redditor describes it as: to take the grill pill is to disconnect emotionally from national politics, which is on rails, and to focus on things you can do to better yourself, your situation, your community, and real life with your own two hands. It's not about getting lost emotionally in the ups and downs of abstract, liminal national politics over which you have zero control. And I thought this was a perfect definition of my journey, from a person who was really steeped in, like millennial culture, and we can change the world. And if we just get this social networking thing to work right, then we can liberate this, and crypto is going to save us all. And, there was always this solution that something's going to come along and save us. But as a Christian, I became a Christian in 2002 from atheism. I converted at 18 after 9/11. And I would say that in my heart and mind, I became a Christian, but I didn't really submit my life to Jesus until 2018. And that had a profound effect on me in a lot of ways. And I would say that once you really focus in on your faith and you understand the gospel, then you understand that Jesus is the only hope for the earth, and that to have perfection in this life is impossible for humans to try and engineer anything like that. And what we're called to do is to either pull heaven down or pull hell up. And I think in so many instances in my political career and in my daily interactions online, I choose to pull hell up. And I really, after 2018, 2020 was a real like kind of wake up call through all of that election and COVID. And our We Are Libertarians Facebook page had like 100,000 people. And man, if we were punching people in the face, we were getting millions of impressions. But I started to notice that I was just like sick. Like I wasn't physically ill, but I just felt awful all the time. I felt like this weight of stress all the time. I felt physically ill, like I had to check out for a couple years to really kind of recalibrate my emotions, because I had spent so long looking at politics and libertarianism as this ideology that could really save all of us. And if we just did this, if we just get this and do this, it becomes like a Tower of Babel. And I think, we focus in the church so much, especially on the right, on sexual sin is the great sin of our day. And I don't think it's that. I think it's that political idolatry is the great sin of our generation now. And people aren't understanding that yet, because we think that we are going through these motions and spending a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of family time, our health, our money. When I ran the Libertarian Party, I'd watch people ruin their marriages to get 3%. They drain their bank account. Like, I got made fun of by a lot of Mises people when I replied to Rechtenwald back in the day. He's like, I'm getting fired for this, I'm doing this. And I just say, like, please don't. Like, you're doing it for people who do not appreciate it, first of all. And second of all, running for office is not worth ruining your life, your marriage, your health, your finances, any of it. It just kind of got to a point where it just all added up in 2021, where it's like, I'm making an idol of this. I'm looking at politics as if it can bring perfection on earth. And that's not how any of this works. There is no political ideology that will make the world more peaceful. The gospel can do that, but libertarianism, conservatism, progressivism, communism, these things are inherently chaotic. Now, I am still a libertarian because I think that the not using force and violence against people is obviously the most peaceful way to organize a society. But is it worth ruining my peace, or ruining my finances, ruining my audience's health, right? The people that listen to me, that have trust in me. I don't know. I don't want to be leading people astray. So I've gone a little quiet as I've done a lot of soul searching on what actually matters. And I think you really got to prioritize yourself in the spheres that you're called to serve in. You need to take care of your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health, your financial health. Then you take care of your family, your immediate family, your spouse, your kids, your extended family. Make sure that you've got your job and career to fund all those things going well. Make sure you have good relationships and friendships. And then if all of those things in that order are aligned, then you can focus on your community, right? Then you get involved in local politics, or get involved in a local church at an activism level, or like in a nonprofit, or build an institution. But we as Christians have to think about what we're creating. And so, are you creating a redemptive institution that brings heaven down to earth? Or are you, forgive my language, can I say the S word?
Oh, sure, it's fine.
Are you shit posting for attention because that feels good, right? It's kind of a drug.
Can't we do both, Chris? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I mean, there really isn't. I don't think there's a middle way, right? Like, I really tried for years to find that middle way, because if somebody who is working towards becoming a talk radio show host, who works in media, like I make all my money in media, like I'd love to have have that both, but I just don't. I don't see a way to do that. Like, you have to be an agent of peace in a world of chaos. And like, what's the best way to do that? And I don't know that political media, that political activism is always the best way to do that.
Yeah. I like this one comment from Lord of the Ree, gotta clean your room, bucko.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
If you're not building a strong foundation, then how do you build all those other pieces? We're called to service, but like, when you look at the Libertarian Party and our involvement in the Libertarian Party, we were involved in two very different eras of the Libertarian Party. But when I had three, really, I built a family during the COVID era. I also started producing a podcast called Leaders and Legends, which interviewed all of the elites and decision makers of Indianapolis. Not one of them have ever heard of anything that I had ever done as head of the Libertarian Party. We were just so not in the conversation. And the third was getting involved in the Pat Down podcast, which, exposed me to a lot of progressives, liberals, Black audiences, people that don't think like me, don't live like me, are more secular than me. And I don't know, being in touch with them really kind of gave me a broader perspective. But yeah, that second piece of like, man, I worked really hard and I literally ruined my first marriage over to libertarianism. It's like, that's mentally ill.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly put a strain on my marriage because of how much I got involved, which led to needing to scale back because I was just taking to some extent, part of the problem is specifically, at least with Libertarian Party politics, in that there's not enough people to do things, and so you show up and you can easily just start like, oh, you want to be on this committee? Oh, you want to be on this committee? Oh, you want to chair your your county party? Oh, it's like you want to be a delegate. Like you can get in and quickly overextend yourself if you're the type of person who likes to be active and involved. Whereas, and granted, I don't have personal experience with the Democrat or Republican Party at that level, but I imagine that like they're just pulling from a bigger pool. So
It's
yeah,
the
they'd
same
probably
thing.
find they'd probably find something for you to do, but you're probably not going to be like, oh, we're going to give you 8 hats to wear all at once.
It is the exact same. I will tell you, like, we say that about the Libertarian Party, but because I work for a newspaper, I've been involved in the local political establishment for 20 years. They are the same way, right? Like, you get involved and you are competent, you get asked to do a lot of things. I think ultimately my message is that it's not bad to be involved. It's really good to be involved, actually. Like, as Christians, we're called to understand the news, understand current events, respond in love, understand our local communities, and find the ways that we can show Christian charity and love in those situations. But I think we have gone too far in the political space, in the libertarian space, and in a lot of other places, and we have replaced um, the good things in life and replaced God in many ways through political activism. We have to put it in its right place. It is last in those spheres. So
Right.
if
So
you're really good at those earlier spheres, the personal and interpersonal, then branch out into the community. But your goal should just make sure that you're keeping track of what's important and not letting it emotionally affect you. Right. And
right,
that's the key piece.
right. So it's like Ordo Morris, but without the racism.
Right. Yeah. I think there's look, like, you can't say no. I'm sorry, wife, I can't love you because I haven't done my workout today. Like, so I don't think you have to be strict with it, but I think you do have to recognize. I prefer Kuyper in almost all
Yes.
situations. Abraham
Yeah.
Kuyper,
Yep.
and his concept of spheres, and
Yep.
I view Kuyper as the Christian model in so many ways because he had an effective personal life. He took care of what he needed to take care of close to home, but then he was able to branch out and create universities, create a political party. He became prime minister. He was an extremely effective person because of what he called his iron regime, which was his self-discipline. And I think he just engaged the world in the right way. He understood the need to stand for truth, but also to balance that with pluralism. That
Yep.
you can have, you need to be a bold witness for Christ without the oppression of other people because they disagree with you. And I think we in libertarian space have lost a lot of that too, which really is dismaying to me.
Yeah. What do you think? Like one of the things, which is not exactly related to the grill pill, gray, black, whatever, but it's somewhat related, is I have struggled. So I said we weren't going to get into the Mises Caucus stuff, but this will be slightly entering in that territory,
I will
which
warn
is
you. Here's my relation. Let me give you warning up front, okay? Because in 2018, I was the first person to say introducing Trumpian politics to libertarian politics is a bad idea. And I'm just gonna say I was right. But you go ahead. All right. I'm just gonna put that out there. And I have a special dislike of Michael Heiss because of the way that he's treated me over the years. So take everything I say with a grain of salt because he treated me terribly. And I tried to reconcile with him and he just wouldn't. So go ahead.
like I said,
I just want people to be aware of my biases.
Sure, and yeah, we all have. Listen, there is so much. I don't want to belittle it by calling it drama, but like there are
Yeah.
there are so many, like, people go, I can't get along with this person. I had this happen with that person, and I I've just learned to be like, you know what? Not everyone's going to be friends. Some people make mistakes and they don't, know how to rectify them, and people go different ways. I'm friends with Heist to this day. Doesn't mean I always agree with everything he's ever said, did, or done, or how he's always treated people. And Same with Dave Smith. Same with everyone in the Mises caucus circles. Still have a lot of good relationships over there, but I did step away as a caucus organizer back in late 23, and then I made a post about it early 24 because I just started to have a difference of strategy with them. And by strategy, I don't even mean big picture political strategy, but just strategy in terms of like relating to other people and libertarians and more of like the intra-party stuff.
Would you say like style over substance? Is that a good way to put it?
Somewhat it's, and this is the heart of it. It's because I see this tension here, and it kind of comes from being a Christian first over a libertarian. So I agree with you that we have to hold fast to proclaiming the truth boldly while also affirming pluralism, right? Which is something Kuiper does really well. I have struggled to kind of figure out how to map that on to any kind of like libertarian outreach and work, whether it's in the party or just in the movement broadly. Because on one hand, I want to affirm pluralism, but on the other hand, and this cuts both ways, I think you need a certain culture to like, or put it this way, not all cultures are equally conducive to promoting liberty and libertarian virtues and ends. But that goes to both maybe the things you believe and what you celebrate culturally in terms of lifestyle and values, but it also matters for the how you treat people, right? So I think I was attracted to the Mises Caucus because on the social issues and on the sort of like the way that they approached the cultural side of things and the culture war, that was more like, yeah, this is what resonates with me, because I think liberty is important, but liberty has to be paired with personal responsibility and virtue, because I think sinful people kind of like create the government they deserve. You
because
could say.
if you don't do those things, you end up at force, which is how many of the people that we have known that were libertarians are post-libertarians that now have made the deal with political force to get what they want. You know, they've given up on the idea that the non-aggression principle works. You know, I agree with you. That's why I was originally critical and have remained critical of the project, because it was sort of rooted in pride, I guess is the way that I would put it. It said to people who had been libertarians for a long time, who had a lot of institutional knowledge, that you don't know what you're talking about. Sit down and shut up. It's our turn. And then went on to make every mistake that had been worked out 5 years before or 10 years before by those people, right? If you go and listen to my conversation with Dave Smith, I mean, I say basically that, like, you guys are making a mistake by doing this, this, and this. Nah, I don't think you're right. Okay, you'll learn, because I did all those dumb things 5 years before you did. So I think that was the first turnoff for me. It was that you're approaching things in a way that say there's no value to institutional knowledge. I think I'm an institutionalist at heart, because I think humans are so prone to fall into cult-like behavior that you need institutions that can be a moderating force in society against cult of personalities. And I think as Christians, we are called to create, like God created, institutions that affirm his truths, that affirm his word, creating families, first and foremost, as an institution. Whatever that family looks like. Not every family can look like mine. That's okay, right? But secondly, are you creating schools? Are you creating educational institutions? Are you like, what are we creating? And is it redemptive instead of exploitative or just sort of self-gratifying?
Well, yeah, I think what you're getting at is that like culture is more. So I think often when we're talking about like the culture war, whether that's from the libertarian or Christian angle, we'll focus on the hot button issues, which I do think are important, right? We'll talk about marriage, we'll talk about abortion, we'll talk about,
We talk
parental
about
rights
what
in
gets
schools.
clicks. Let's be honest. We
Well,
talk
yeah,
about what gets clicks. If we talked about what Jesus cared about, just taking care of homeless people, I did like the first episode on libertarian podcasting on helping the homeless in like 2017 because I searched and searched and searched. Nobody had ever done one. But you could find a million podcasts about same-sex marriage or gay marriage or whatever, because it's what gets clicks. And that is like our ears being tickled. It's perverse compared to like what God wants us to focus on and bring light to. So yeah, I think so. The Mises thing, just back to it, like pride. Secondly, it was you were intentionally supposed to inflame. I became one of the early people that was on the receiving end of that, and we are libertarians. And it's because we're more moderate as a group. You were on Hodie's show a lot. We are not liberals. I'm a Ron Paul Republican still. I'm a Mitch Daniels Republican. I'm a Christian conservative person. I have not changed my beliefs since 2009. Like, I just haven't. I've become more libertarian and more conservative and Christian, if anything. But I just don't like, I just got tired of treating people poorly. And to be involved in the libertarian movement, you had to play that game more and more and more.
Yes.
And I think that's a function of political media as much as it is like, it's not the philosophy of libertarianism. And so I don't know, maybe you're just feeling like that tug of like where I felt the Spirit saying to me, like, yeah, that's really cool that you got 1 million impressions on that post that like made people really angry. Is that what I wanted you to do today?
Well, right. And the other thing that just comes to mind is that part of culture isn't just the issues I was talking about, but it's also like what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, that like all the gifts of knowledge and of prophecy, and like in 12 he lists all the spiritual gifts, and then follows it up in 13, which a lot of people quote in like their wedding vows, but really it's about more than just romantic love. It's this idea that like all the things we do really amount to nothing, that they will not bear fruit if love isn't at the root of what is driving us. And so as much as I resonate, and even today resonate with a lot of the Mises Caucus style in terms of like on the issues, and even sometimes still on like big picture strategy, I will often sympathize with them. But what caused the divide was that they were often animated more by the hatred of those who were in their way, not just the hatred of the state, but the hatred of other libertarians who didn't agree with them. And that didn't, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I think the party has not done well under the Mises Caucus since the takeover. But one of them at the root is that it was not, and you know what, like, I think there was, again, things are complicated and nuanced, right? Like Dave Smith said this at a Mises Caucus event in Pennsylvania in 2021. He was like, any political revolution that's not rooted in love is doomed to fail. And it's like, I agree, Dave was right. And that's what happened, because it wasn't rooted in love. Maybe there was an attempt to, maybe some of us tried it, but, and maybe this is a little bit of cope on my part, but I think part of it is the incentives of just politics in general, is that it's incredibly toxic and corrosive, and it doesn't absolve anyone of personal responsibility, but certainly it's like liquoring people up a little bit.
Yeah, it's ultimate end goal. Like any policy position, for instance, that isn't rooted in the Imago Dei is ultimately going to fail, right? Because like that's why I look at immigration a lot differently than a lot of other libertarians now, and I always have, is because I look at immigrants as people. And I have not heard, like, going back to my talk radio days when people call into the talk radio station, I'm like, you don't sound like you're talking about a human being. Like, you sound like you're dehumanizing them to a point that they become a caricature. And I think that's so much of what political media is now. We're dehumanizing opponents to a point that they become a caricature. And I do this all the time, which is why I say less, because I just know my tendency. I think it is so incredibly important to root our politics first and foremost in every person being created in the image of God. And then from there, figuring out the proper application of government violence. And ultimately, that's like to protect their liberty and dignity. And libertarians often are forgetting the dignity part. And if you read libertarian thought before 2016, the dignity part was a lot of the times in there as much as the liberty part. And I think losing God's focus on dignity as much as liberty has kind of moved the movement in a bad direction. But yeah, I think there is a decided lack of Imago Dei in libertarian discourse today. And I think it's like it's lost its first love of the non-aggression principle and being rooted in love, and that we don't apply force to people. It's kind of getting carried along with the current because it's unmoored from principles. I've got like a whole series on libertarian principles and some of the stuff we're talking about that I'm going to start rolling out of my show, because I just think it's so important to get back to principles. And my friend Brian Nichols, whom I love, is like, nobody gives a crap about principles. And I know, but like, look at the end result.
Well, this is why I've been trying to do this a lot lately, because I've done a bunch of conversations on immigration and political strategy over the last like 6 months, and I'm very, so like you brought up Brian Nichols, I'm kind of like right in the middle of both of you,
right?
Because like on one hand, sure, no one cares about principles, but they should.
And I'm not saying he doesn't care about principles. He's just saying, like, look, if you're trying to sell liberty, like starting with like esoteric ideas isn't always the right place to start.
But it's not always the wrong either. Like, I think to some extent we can reach people by showing that we're very passionate about our first principles and these ideas, right? Maybe not everyone, but I also agree with Brian that like, if all you bring to the table is the ideas and you don't have any practicum to go with it, that I think that hurts you too.
There has to be application.
Right. There has to, and so I often get frustrated because beyond just like the dumb LP infighting of the last 6 years, the infighting that persists in the movement, often it's often framed in like radicals versus prags,
right?
And I just don't know that we have to be divided in terms of like warring against each other there. I think it's just like we should view it as a division of labor, that some of us focus on theory and some of us focus on application.
It's like the free market of ideas. Everybody's attracted to a different way of thinking. Like Brian's very interested in selling liberty. I don't have any interest in convincing you to be a libertarian. I talk about libertarianism because I'm talking about things I'm interested in and with people I'm interested in talking to. And if you want to like tune in, like I think of it more like a journalist. He thinks of it more like a salesperson. And those are two, like, that's not right or wrong. Like Brian does a tremendous service to the libertarian movement in a lot of ways. And I do too. It's just, we have two different versions. Like somebody wakes up every day, Jacob, and thinks, I'm so excited to be a turnip farmer. I can't believe God let me grow turnips. Oh, I can't wait to get to my office and do accounting. I would die. I would just die of boredom. I couldn't do either of those, right? And they can't podcast. They can't edit audio and video, right? Like, so I don't know. We need to apply that same, and that's like the getting away from liberal democratic capitalism as a foundational theory of organizing government and moving more towards, in some cases, theocracy, in some cases, theonomy, in some cases, monarchy. Like these, I think the American people are so steeped in liberal democratic capitalism and the myths of America and the truths of America that it's going to be very hard for people to look at like a Trump administration, which is largely, I heard the term patrimonialism, which is basically using the state to enrich your family, and everything's regarded like about personal loyalty. Like that's not liberty. I have no interest in supporting a person who's trying to enrich themselves, who puts tariffs on cell phones and then magically starts a cell phone company. Like, I'm sorry, like that's corruption. I'm not interested in that. I don't see that as a vehicle towards a better culture or a better, more efficient government, which is so often the argument that libertarians make for Trump. Like, I don't get how you can have the root of the administration be so corrupt and so unchristian, and then try to delude yourself that that man can help get our culture and get our politics to a Christian destination or a libertarian destination. It's just as nonsensical to me as Kamala Harris doing the same. Like, it's just not going to work. And so you have to step back and say, okay, what's the actual way that we can achieve this? Okay, what can I actually do? I'm not designed to care about every bomb dropping in every location on the earth. I think it is important to understand those things, to stay informed, but not to be emotionally manipulated by the news, because I have to stay focused on the 2-year-old that is desperately waiting for me to get home today in a good mood to play with them, and a wife that doesn't deserve to be screamed at because I spent all day on Twitter, right? Like, I can't rob the people that God has put in my charge and in my care for the sake of pleasing some audience on some online, it's like an online continent, and people are really big on their online continent, but in the real world, they're very small. It just doesn't make any sense. And I came to this realization watching the movie Big Fish. Okay, so I was just going through this period where it was like I was getting worn out, like 2018, 2019. And I watched the movie Big Fish, and he's this like tells all these tall tales. It's a great movie. And I think it's Albert Finney is just like the storyteller, and his son Ewan McGregor is just like, you're so full of crap, I can't take it. But he realizes at the end, as Albert Finney's being carried to the river, he's surrounded by the 100 people that were in this story, that were in his life, that these stories that he told connected him to these people and their humanity, and they connected to his humanity. And I stepped back and I went, oh, I'm called to serve the 100 people that are coming to my funeral. I need to serve my circle. That's my field of vision. That is my sphere of responsibility. And everything beyond that cannot emotionally affect me so much. And it's been like a process of like unwinding, or political deconstruction, you might call it, or media deconstruction. Not Christian deconstruction, something similar, but let's just take everything off the table and like look at all the pieces, and then reconstruct my political philosophy and my relationship to the news in a way that is honoring Christ, honoring myself, honoring my family, and serving those 100 people. And I think about serving my circle and that illustration all the time, just to kind of keep me in my frame of reference in a healthy way, because I can create great culture and I can create change by managing what God has given me. He knows my limitations. I often don't. I think I can do all these different things and run off in all these different directions, and then it all falls apart, and I'm like, oh, why? Because I was trying to do too much. I was over functioning. So I think that's like the key. If you want to create culture, if you want to create a better political sphere and situation, you've got to start from the fundamental building blocks of your life and work your way up, and start with the people that God has put in your life and put into contact with you.
So I think a lot of that makes sense. And I think that no matter, definitely this is similar to which we referenced earlier, clean your room, get your house in perfect order before you get out to set out to correct the world, like putting your own mask on first, starting small, working your way out. I do wonder, like, part of my hesitancy towards this whole grill pill idea, towards this idea of politics not working, is there are some things like war, and even like maybe immigration to a lesser extent, where the human tragedy, like the element of human tragedy and human suffering, is at such a scale, and then also the extent to which Christians, at least in the nominal sense, are involved in perpetuating these things, that I have a hard time getting to a place where I could feel like I could. I know you're not saying bury your head in the sand, but I have a hard time thinking about how I could get to a place where those would not be like passions of mine to be speaking about. And then so like what I do on my show is a lot of focus on theory, but then also kind of like talking about global politics and U.S. foreign policy, Ron Paul stuff, and trying to do it from the Christian worldview, because I think to some extent part of uh, and you mentioned Kuiper. I know you kind of are sort of from the Reformed perspective, and I often think, as the Reformed tradition, I think expresses this most clearly, but I do think this is just the historic Orthodox position too, that we as the church are the continuation of the uh, of essentially covenant Israel in the Old Testament. Started with the covenant God made with Abraham, and so this is what it says in Galatians, right? That we're inheritors of the promises of Abraham, united with Christ, who is the true offspring of Abraham and the true Israel. And so I think like the things that Israel was called to be, I think we as the church are called to be. Like we're to be a blessing to the nations. We're to be also, I think, like at many points, Israel's prophets filled this role, or even like people like Moses filled this role. Like we're when we see injustice, I think we're supposed to be a prophetic voice that speaks out against that, right? Like if and Jesus said in the passage of the sheep and the goats, and I always forget the chapter number, I know it's in Matthew, that like that which you do to the least of these you've done unto me. And yeah, of course that matters perhaps in a primary sense for those immediately in your vicinity, but it also feels like that has to matter for like the Palestinians living in, rubble right now. Because and then like it's especially aggrieving to me because it's like how much of that is propped up by other Christians who feel like we have this undying loyalty to Israel because of, what I would call flawed eschatology and a
Yeah.
flawed view of the covenantal ordering of what Scripture teaches. And so all that compels me to be like, yeah, I can't let that drive me to a point where now I become a bad father, a bad husband, a bad worker. It's like, so not like if my life falls apart because I'm so focused on these things, well, I'm not even going to be effective at solving those things anyway. But I guess that's part of, like, for me, it's kind of like, yeah, listen, I was just grilling with people from my church a couple of days ago, and hanging out with them. But it's like, but in the back of my mind, I just think like also like, man, we're really close to, you know, a war in Iran that's going to make Iraq in 2005, look like, or 2003 through 2005 to look like, like nothing. If the worst case scenario happens there.
I-24 was reporting today that Trump is considering getting involved, and yeah. To your point, I think it all comes down. Oz Guinness's book, The Call, is a great book. I used to think of calling as like, oh, if only God would reveal his will to me and give me the opportunity, put me in the place where my final destination, blah, 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 blah. That's not really what calling means. I have a different understanding after reading that book. You're called to share, like, help perpetuate the kingdom in the places you are put. And I think in your case and my case, we're given these platforms to talk about these things, to share opinions. I have a harder time sharing my opinion on things because I'm like, who am I? But God has given me people that listen to me and take me seriously and want to hear what I have to say. And you heard what I had and invited me on. I don't understand, but here I am. Right. And I think there are times and places where we are called by God to stand up for what is right. I was reading in 2 Kings about Josiah smashing the idols, and he becomes king, and he just starts going ham on Asher poles and Baal, just like absolute, like, but then his son takes over, and his son just rebuilds all of it. right?
Yep.
Like, I think we have to have so to put a pin on this, like, you're called to do this, to share that opinion, to challenge status quo ideas, to look and examine things in the church, right? Like, the Megan Bashams and the Hank Hanegraaffs of the world are called to look at these things. And sometimes I think some of that goes too far. It's a little too much like what we were talking about earlier, where it's like, are you being divisive? But I do think like Julie Roys and Megan Basham serve their purpose, where they come into the church and they say, look, it's not right for James McDonald to be oppressive to his staffs. It's not right for Stephen Furtick to spend $5,000 on a pair of shoes. It's not right for these organizations to fund things that are explicitly unchristian, right? I think there's corrections, and people have to speak out and say, like, Israel's covenant in the Old Testament is different than why are we sending money to Israel? Why are we like going through all these different things, right? I don't want to lose the thread and get into an Israel conversation, but that's part of your calling. You're given this thing to do, and you have to steward it well. So I'm not saying don't be involved in those things. I think it's about having the right perspective on things. First and foremost, are you approaching it with a humility and through a Christian worldview? And are you trying to find out what God says about how does he view Israel? Right? Because I think that's first and foremost. I think like I said, your your average person has to be informed. They need to understand these things. We need to know what truth is. You cannot do that if you're not reading newspapers, magazines, and books. Like, it's just not enough to and listening to podcasts. But even then, like, the only way to fact check a podcast is to read a bunch of books. The only way to do a podcast is to read a bunch of books. It's to read a bunch of news. It's to like understand what these things are and what's true and what's not true, and how to challenge it. So like, I'm not saying check out at all. And I know that you aren't saying that because you acknowledge that. But if you are called to be an electrician, if you were called to be a teacher, if you were called, like, are you neglecting those callings for social media attention? Because you feel like I'm part of this movement online that is fighting the man. Like, yeah, there's real change that can happen from like social media pressure, but it's not that much change. It's not nearly as great as the change that you can make. And that if you were concerned with war or immigration, finding a human being in your area that you can, like an Afghan translator that has served the United States and fought the Taliban, and can you go do something for them, or can you find a refugee here, or can you, like, how are you creating some peaceful means in your local community at a personal level? I think social media has to factor into this conversation heavily, as much as politics, because we confuse action for achievement. Social media makes us, and the Libertarian Party makes us feel that because we're doing an action, we are achieving something. And that is not always the case. And so what is the achievement that God wants for each of us? It is to share the kingdom and spread the kingdom and share the gospel and witness to other people through our lives, and be on mission in our regular lives. And I can't really do that online. I'm just a poor Christian online. I'm just too mean. I love fighting. I think it was in my conversation with Dave Smith where he's like, I love to argue. I love to be combative. He loves the fight. I do too. I love it too much, to the point that it's like an addiction for me. So I try not to do it. That's what I'm saying is, like, if you don't ever get close to Jesus and make him an active part of your daily life, you're not going to know what the right amount is.
Well, that I certainly agree with, and I think there is a sort of putting the first things first all of the things that we're talking about. I mean, even the things at home, right? Like, you're not going to get your marriage right. You're not going to get your work to leisure and family time and balance right. Like, so yeah, that relationship with Christ and being plugged into the church and having accountability to other, men of God, or if you're a woman, to other women of God. Yeah, like that stuff is like the building blocks of just anything that you want to do worthwhile in your life. And I certainly I agree with that
That's
100%.
that's the grill pill. The grill pill is being concerned and being aware, but not being emotionally dependent on that drug, and
Hmm.
having it in its proper place. And even if you're coming at this from a secular perspective, and you made it this far and you're a secular person, like, are your relationships being affected by your political awareness, your news junkiness, your, are you actively harming yourself or your finances or your relationships with your political action, with your, I mean, I think we've all seen people on all sides over the last 10 years make their whole personality and jettison entire relationships and friendships. Like, part of that is a discussion of values. But if you're disconnecting from people, you oftentimes don't have the ability to discuss your values in a way that is healthy.
Sure. Yeah. No
And I
one.
think that's a huge problem.
Well, this is where the whole libertarian, autism thing comes up, right? Because, yeah, and 100%. I mean, I remember I was, attending an elder and deacon class at my church for people who were like, that the church identified as like prospective, deacon and elkin. My gosh, deacons
Deacon
and
and
elders for the future. And one of the things that they talked about was that, like, something that can be very dysfunctional to a church and to a church community is when people hold things in a different emphasis, even if they agree on the core thing.
Yeah.
And not to say everyone's going to have the exact same emphasis, but that, like, like, you can get carried away with something to the point where then you're raising it to a level where it starts to diminish other things, which are also important. And so it can become imbalanced. And I think that's kind of part of what you're saying there, which I agree with. I think
Yeah.
there's also an element of, like, this is the true of everything in the Christian walk, I think, where it's balancing the praxis with our trust and hope being in Christ. Because, like, I obviously think that, especially as a reformed person, I think that ultimately what leads to someone being saved is more the act of the Holy Spirit acting on someone's heart. But I also know that God uses, as part of that process, the preaching of the word and the acts of service of, us, the body of Christ. And so what we do is important. But if we start putting all of our hope in, I have to go out there and do this, and that's what's going to save people, and then you can get, rather,
Right.
almost like cage stagey in your evangelism, right? Rather than a mature Christian knows that, like, I'm going to do what is within my control, and the rest is up to God.
Yeah.
And you put you kind of rest in that. It's like that, what is the serenity prayer, like, give me the courage to change what I can, the trust to, endure what I, can't, and the wisdom to kind of discern between those two things, the things I can change
It
and things
comes
I
down to
can't.
humility. Where is the humility in so much of what we're doing these days in the libertarian movement, in political media, in politics? Like, to be humble is to actively harm your ability to get Patreon subscribers and advertisers and downloads. And so I think in a lot of ways,
By the
political
way,
media.
please like, share, and subscribe this number.
Right, yeah, and I think, look, this is a blessing to have the ability to do these kinds of shows and have these kind of conversations that are unfiltered and uncensored, and that is a huge part of it. But I also think we have to look at what is the end game if you make this a career, and what is the incentive structure for a Tim Pool, a Charlie Kirk, you know, you know, I don't know a Democratic analog. I don't really pay attention to progressive stuff, but you know what, for Cenk Unger, like what is their incentive structure? It's audience capture. It is making sure that they never say anything that turns their audience off, that turns that spigot off, that turns their movement against them. And it's especially difficult in the Trump MAGA world, where you have somebody like Elon Musk, who one day is the GOAT and then the next day a GOAT, right? Because of his personal opinion of Trump. Well, that doesn't tell me that you're a healthy movement in any way, shape, or form. And it goes back to something you just kind of said, like everybody has their own gifts. We all bring that to the church. And that was a foundation. If you go to the about page of We Are Libertarians, that was like born out of my experience with the Ron Paul Republicans in 2008 to 12, because there was this sense of arrogance and entitlement that we're not going to get involved in the libertarian movement. We need to go into the party and we need to fix the Republican Party and change it from the inside. And so when the Mises guys came around, I was very excited that like finally we're going to have some merging of, we're allies and working as allies. But if you look at the about page, like everyone brings something different and valuable to the libertarian movement. And that value has not been protected and encouraged in the last 6-7 years, to our detriment, because we're all a bunch of weirdos, but I'm not like, you may not be my flavor of weirdo and I might not be yours, but I may be somebody's, right?
Let me share something that's personal that gets right to the heart of this, that I had to really wrestle with, because when I realized it was incredibly convicting. I realized that a lot of my participation, just both by just being part of it, and also just the way in which I let this is difficult to parse out. I want to say it very precisely. I walked into the party and in the Mises Caucus, and there was a lot of, and I'm sure you would agree, as much as we can assign blame and bad behavior to people on that side, there was a lot of it coming from other camps and sides within the party apparatus as well. And I walked into it a little, naively, innocently, got blasted by it, and that made me resentful. It made me bitter, and it sort of then played into my ability to just get angry and feel very self-righteous and justified in kind of like returning, evil for evil, tat for tat, right? And then when things kind of got cartoonish enough that it kind of snapped me back to reality, and then I started to really in a good way, deconstruct my time there. I was like, how much of my behavior and involvement was the opposite of a good witness for the gospel?
Sure.
And I think that's kind of at the heart of what we're talking about. The minute when our involvement in worldly things compromises our ability to be good, and none of us are perfect, we all fall short, but there's a difference between someone who is humble, recognizes their faults more in the moment, and is working towards trying to be sanctified and thinking first of the kingdom, right? Seek first the kingdom of God, and someone who is seeking first things of the world. Christ becomes an afterthought, and then the fruit that's born from that is just not good fruit, and it does not provide a good witness and testimony for the gospel and for the idea of lives being transformed by the gospel. And so,
because as much as we like to think that we are immune from Satan and evil, we are not. We are very malleable people. Look at the COVID era. And there's a reason that Satan takes Jesus to the top of the mountain in the third temptation. There's a book called The Third Temptation that's kind of about politics and Christianity and this general concept of like, this is Satan's playground. Why do you think politics and political power was Satan's to offer to Jesus in the third temptation? And what did Jesus say to Satan? Get behind me, Satan. He rules over everything, but this is specifically of the world. And when you come into this arena, and how many libertarians have you heard say they have a Fed following them? or they watch House of Cards. I was doing politics during House of Cards, and we all thought we were in House of Cards. It was cosplay. And you become delusional and prideful and just arrogant, and it's because you are putting yourself into a system that is inherently prideful and arrogant and encourages evil behavior, right?
And it encourages dehumanizing people too.
It's corrosive to the individual. It's corrosive to society. And it doesn't matter if it's communism, monarchism, capitalism, liberalism, whatever, libertarianism would have its own problems, right? It is the arena of the world. And so if we are hoping that you're going to find salvation, or that you personally are going to be the savior because you got elected to a state rep house as a libertarian, or you're a city councilor in Wichita, or, like, I've been very fortunate in my career. So like my professional life has been in local media, and it has been at nationally syndicated comedy shows. It's been, with a lot of different famous people in a lot of different verticals, from racing to comedy to politics to business to whatever. And you take like the most famous race car driver who has their butt kissed at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and you take them to and put them in the system of the legislature, nobody cares. And you take the most famous legislator and you put them in the comedy world, nobody cares. Like, we create these little worlds that make us feel significant, our own little Tower of Babels, and then it crumbles because it's not of the kingdom. It is something of the world, and it is our own little houses that we construct for our own little temples for our own glorification. That's never going to last. And even if we get it right, like Josiah, our next generation is going to mess that up. It's like let's have the Constitutional Convention people. I'm like, have you looked around? More people like Barack Obama and socialism than like what we have to offer. Even the Republicans don't like what we have to offer now. We're going to open up the Constitution and let a bunch of socialists and conservative socialists read. This is just the world. And so I know that we can become disenchanted. There's an audiobook that I'm listening to right now called Cultural Apologetics by Stephen Gould. It's a lecture. And I'm on the chapter right now where he's talking about C.S. Lewis and his the illustration. And it's an audiobook, so I don't know all of it. But C.S. Lewis writes about a bicycle. And at one point, it's just nothing to you. It's machines adults use. Then it becomes everything. And then you become disillusioned with it, disenchanted with it, and you cast it aside. And then eventually you come to appreciate that thing again, and it's re-enchantment. It's just talking about how can we re-enchant the world with the gospel, because the gospel is the only thing that can bring hope. It is the only thing that can bring redemption. It's the only thing that does bring life. It's really, at the end of the day, our only hope. And so why would we go chasing after all of these little castles in the air that are going to crumble, this is what Jesus was talking about when he was saying, build your firm foundation versus building on sand, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, well, I think it's almost like, because I sort of agree. I don't know if I would quite express it the way you did, but when you were talking about how you're still a libertarian, but it's become less important.
It's not my whole identity.
Well, right. And so I think that libertarianism to me is not, and I mean, sometimes it's you'll say, oh, I'm a libertarian, right? Or I'm an ANCAP or whatever. But it's really, it's just kind of a shorthand way to be this is my political philosophy. Right. It really isn't my identity. And to me, libertarianism is a tool insofar as that I think that the way we put it here at LCI, that libertarianism is the most consistent expression of Christian political thought. So when we're talking about what's the role of government as Christians, and also, what's the role of government when it comes to the market and economies and things like that, I think libertarianism is really useful in sort of building on what the Bible already gives us.
Right.
Right. It's like doing the Bible is not anti-science, but The Bible gives us a worldview, and then you can use that to then use the scientific method to improve human life and flourishing, and even improve what we do for the kingdom of God. And I think libertarianism can do that. But what I think a lot of people do is they live as if libertarianism is like it's what they're putting their hope in. And I think even a lot of people, probably like me, who are Christians, we are guilty of putting faith or hope in the party or a caucus or a thought leader, even Ron Paul himself, right? And thinking like this is what's going to save us. And then all that comes out of it, you were something that comes to mind is the passage in I think First Peter 2, and this is the one where people often quote out of context just the line "honor the emperor," but they miss so much of what comes before that, because honor the emperor comes at the end of this long refrain from Paul, where he's saying that you are a royal priesthood. You are to live, again, connecting to that we inherit this sort of like tradition of Israel that like we're, and again, this isn't. But some people, I just know people hear that and they think, so what? It's replacement theology, and you hate the Jews. It's like no, no. This is inclusive of the Jews. That it's the Jews and the Gentiles. Like there is no Jew or no Greek. We're all one in Christ. It's one continuation of a covenant people that was started with the Jewish people, but now it's not of the flesh. It's of faith. But we are all called to be this royal priesthood, a holy nation, so to speak, not an earthly nation, but of Christ, and to live as sojourners in this world. And so that's why he then says to be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor or to governors or whatnot. For the will of God is that by doing good, that you will put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. And he says that, what you need to do is to keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they will see your good deeds and it will glorify God, and you'll be blameless before others. Like that I think is part of what we're talking about too, is that like what I was talking about in terms of my own personal journey through this was that I was not I was almost because there's this emphasis at the end where it says fear God, honored the emperor, and what I had done was inverted that.
Right.
I was fearing the earthly powers, and so my hope was no longer aimed at the cross and the empty tomb. It was aimed at we got to defend. And I still think it's important to speak up against the powers, right? We struggle, but that it's more than just the earthly institutions, right? Because we don't struggle against flesh and blood.
Yeah, the more you read the Bible, you understand Matthew 6 and anxiety more. Like there's a lot of stuff in my personal life that I don't talk about that is very stress inducing. And sometimes you just have to go, like we had a situation that's going on right now where it's money, and man, how are we gonna make this work?
Yep.
And we had our car had been totaled in February, I think it was, and we'd just gotten around to like taking it in. This is drivable, but it's probably going to be totaled because it's over. And right at the moment that we decided to take it in, it gets totaled, and we get a check for not just the loan, then some, that covered a bunch of stuff right at the time where we're going to have a baby on Thursday. It's Monday. It was just such a clear example of God providing. I've been on a big Phil Robertson kick lately, and he was talking about, he had $600 bill payment that he had to make, one day. And he's like, well, let's just go check the mailbox. And $610 showed up in the mailbox. That provision has happened to me so many times. I'm not saying Jesus is my piggy bank, but I'm saying that like when I had a situation where I just had to say, I have no way to solve this problem. I have tried. I'm sorry for spending the last month worrying about this and trying to come. I'm giving up on this. I just have to trust that you're going to take care of us. And then the next day, he takes care of us. I mean, George Mueller is incredibly inspirational on that line. But like, where's the political version of that for us? That, like, you are so untrusting of God that he cannot fight for liberty, freedom, and dignity, right? Like, it's that we have to do it. We have to get in there and fight for it. And and that's why I'm a big fan of pluralism and Kuyper's model is because, like, we don't need force to tell people to live in these certain ways. And that's going to make the culture better, because now we've used force to make we're going to make every gay person not have a marriage. Okay, well, that's like the opposite of actually, like, getting people to see your worldview as a positive. And we learned that. Why do you think we've had the backlash? The reaction over the last 10 years is a reaction to the 10 years prior. Instead of just saying, like, I don't talk about, I wish every family the best. My wife and I, we decided to wait till we got married to have sex. We're obviously not virgins, but we decided to do it differently, and we experienced a level of intimacy before that was different. We had 5 miscarriages before Matthew, and God provided. That's why Matthew's name is Matthew Christopher, God's gift to share Christ, basically, because so many people were praying for him. Our family unit, we're very open and public about, like, our family unit, because I want people to see, like, you knew me back when I was divorced and wild and doing the wrong thing and how miserable I was. And I want you now to see this picture of joy and happiness that I have because I'm living within God's rules, like what he wants for us and his will. And instead of just like, I'm going to live this way and let people see the peace, the joy, the hope that I have, and hopefully they'll be inspired by it and build a relationship with them and share these thoughts with them. Like, we just lose all trust in God's ability to be partners in that evangelical mission that I just shared, and say we need to use the force of state. I know we just need this, we need that. Like, it's compromising at the end of the day because you don't trust that God can build an amazing culture.
Right. You don't trust the gospel's impact on individuals and society. I mean, it's crazy. I can't remember what episode I almost made that exact argument on before, but I was literally, it was on Christian nationalism. But you can say, like, the left has their own version of this too, right? With the left, it's, if we don't use force, then, like, people will starve because capitalism won't provide for it, right? And with Christian nationalism and right-wing reactionaryism, it's all like, if we don't use the force of the state, then, like, sin will run rampant, degeneracy will run rampant.
The great sin of the progressives is, Rudolf Steiner's threefold social order, right? You either are solving problems with profit through business, force using government, or compassion using charity. And conservatives and Democrats alike, Republicans and Democrats alike, see business and profit and government and force as the only legitimate ways to solve societal ills and to solve problems in the public sphere. Compassion is far more powerful because it is humans, millions of humans, making a decision to solve that problem in cooperation, harmoniously and peacefully with their fellow citizens, to end hunger, to end war, to end all these different, right? And so,
well, yeah, to me,
fundamental lack of trust in charity that I think has eroded the church and its charitableness. And, like, if you got rid of the tax exemption, it'd be the greatest single tax increase on the poor in this country, because as 1% every year less giving by Christians has taken place over the last 20, 30 years, the nonprofit sector that actually does all the work to actually solve all the problems in the marginalized communities, not the government. They're just giving block grants to those folks now. I mean, we're seeing that with Doge and, like, some of the fallout from that. It's Christians that have to step up and take ownership of that third order and show that libertarianism can work. that
Yeah.
compassion can be a way to solve problems and not profit, and not profit's not bad, but like capitalism inherently can dehumanize people and turn them into parts of a cog, right? And so you need redemptive capitalism to be a partner to the compassion sector and minimize the amount of force that you have, because of all the reasons that obviously we would agree on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's not enough trust in the power of the gospel, and there is just not enough like knowledge of both biblical and just world history to just kind of like in church history. I mean, like what put Christianity on the map was the opposite of force, right? Like Christianity quickly took over the Roman Empire through its radical, almost pacifistic commitment to not using force and overcoming all sorts of divides between culture and lifestyle and whatnot. And not to say that there weren't like, bumps along the apostles had to, do a lot of correction and a lot of
Peter being
guidance and
racist,
whatnot.
it's okay, we can say it. And Paul had to come on and say, Peter, you're being a racist, dude. Stop.
Yeah. But like there's something I almost think like the problem is right wingers. This is a bit of a tangent, but I think right wingers tend to define degeneracy very narrowly to just be about like sexual sin.
Sure.
And I'm like, how is like to me all sin is degeneracy.
We're
If you're not
fighting the last generation's battles, because that's where the money was put: abortion and gay marriage. And
right.
so the means of communication, like we see the means of communication that were grooved out during COVID have an impact now. It's the same thing in the Christian world.
Yeah.
So it's the Israel argument. I was listening to Janet Parshall on Moody Radio the other day, and she was just like losing it, how awesome it was that Israel was attacking Iran. And I'm like, and she's just so bought into the Mike Pence view of how foreign policy ought to work that she can't see anything. The dispensational view of the end times is so deep in her mind that there's no other consideration, right? So,
right.
I'm sorry, I'm tangenting now.
No, I mean it's related to all this, because I think there's a tendency for people to, because I mean so far, I mean at this point in the venture, I'm willing to basically say that I think the grill pill is the correct path as we've unpacked it and discussed it. I think
you can have it all, you just can't have it all at once in 100% maximalism, right? Like you have to be balanced in life.
Yeah.
I think in some ways, I'm not a Buddhist, but I think in some ways, like some of the Buddhist philosophy can really help Christians understand how to like be better Christian. I started out as a Buddhist, and then that's how I converted to Christianity.
Well, that's interesting.
I was an atheist. I hated church. I was a Methodist, and like I was like 6 years old, and they had the sticker chart, and they kept putting the stickers and saying like, "Why aren't you coming to church?" I'm like, "Because my parents only bring me every other few weeks. Like I'm 6, leave me alone." So I just decided Christians were all mean and horrible, and then became an atheist. You know, that was kind of the Dawkins era in the 90s. And 9/11, my family dissolving, basically my nuclear and extended family dissolving, then 9/11, getting dumped by my high school sweetheart. It all just like collapsed in on me. And so I was self-soothing with like a lot of self-help, but Buddhism came into a lot of that at 11th grade and got real into Buddhism. And there's so much about meditation and outlook and like the function of Buddhism that Christians, I think, can adopt in certain ways that can be very like, you learn to meditate, you're going to pray really well. So it's little things like that, but again, tangential.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I mean, that maybe that'll be next time we have you on, we can talk, because I think often this is probably more an evangelical problem than, I don't know if I think Catholics kind of acknowledge this already, that like I don't think there's more than one path to salvation. I think that's through Christ, but not everyone's going to have this like very linear, like picture perfect, like, they were just like there are all sorts of unorthodox ways in which we come to Christ. And some of that is through things like, so I know people who've come to Christ through psychedelics.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that's like, and now that's what, that's the new church ministry I'm proposing. Is like, right, we go out and get everyone on second. No, but like that is a non-normative way that some people come to Christ, and I think other religions sometimes like they're not the truth, but because they're engaging in the realm of like the spiritual, like they will kind of glimpse onto certain elements of like they have like a distorted but still like a slightly impartial grasp of some of the truth, and that can late like I've seen this happen, not with the way you put it with Buddhists, but I've seen Muslims come to Christ because despite the fact that Islam is overall like a false religion, there are things in Islam that get like they point enough to the truth that the people who are like really devout will like pull on those threads,
Yeah.
and then that is what leads them to Christ. So anyway, I think that's a
We
realistic.
all come to Jesus in a state of sin. Jesus
Yeah.
has to reach out to every individual. There's very few people like my wife who are just Christian from the time they're like born, right? Like I had to fight for it. And in some ways I am jealous of her, but in other ways I'm very thankful for my testimony and the way that I came to Christ. But so many of us, and I think this is like to put a bow on all of it, it's just important to remember that if you are a Christian, your job is to make disciples. And
Yep.
it's very difficult to do if you are engaging in political discourse and action in the way that the world does that.
Yeah.
And it is very hard to witness effectively to the state, to other people, and in the way that political media incentives and social media incentives are set up right now. And so you really have to come back to your calling, and that is you are called to cultivate and create and build the kingdom and pull heaven down and be a bearer of peace in society. You're not called to have self-glorification and these political gains that are going to get you a lot of followers and maybe get you elected to an office. Like if you are called to that, then and that is what God has asked you to do, then that's one thing, right? But I think in so many ways, over so much of the course of my 20 years in politics, I was self-soothing, self-gratifying. It was self-masturbatory in a lot of ways, right? Like it's self-pleasure. It is idolatry. It is distraction, because I was operating in a worldly system, because I saw that worldly system as salvific. And that is not what we're called to do. And we are called to share the love of Christ by bearing each other's burdens, by sitting with a friend who needs help, who, if you are going to now look, I have so many great friends from, I think the single greatest thing about the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian movement is the friendships I made. I think it is an awesome social club, like most political. And this is really why so many people are drawn to it. So many people in the Libertarian movement, like I do, that don't have great lives. And they are looking at this as a way to find community. And I think that's great. I'm a big fan of podcasting as a way to build community. I'm in a podcast studio that I operate here in Indianapolis, and I rent it out to other podcasters because I want them to do podcasting in person and build the kind of community that I built with We Are Libertarians. I met my wife through it. We had like 4 marriages come from it. You can build these great friendships by building community around podcasting or knitting or a book club or politics, right? But what are you ultimately building that community for? It is to be missional. It is to reflect the love of Jesus, to build friendships. And if you are using politics as a means to jettison relationships, it's like you just don't have, you don't have the correct view, right? Like if you're a secular humanist and you just sort of exist in the culture that we have and you never question it, then I guess you would look at it and go, like, we can't be friends because you're pro-life. Okay. Like, I literally think you're a murderer, but I'll be your friend, but you can't be my friend because I think it's a human life you're killing. Then I guess that's how it is, but I'm still going to love you and we're still going to be friends. So I don't know. I'm rambling at this point, but yeah, at the end of the day, like, politics has to have its right place. And when you do that, I can promise you it's scary to let go of that identity. It was terrifying to say, I'm not going to be the libertarian podcast guy anymore, because it was my whole identity for like a decade. And now I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a friend, I'm a volunteer, I'm a churchgoer, I'm a podcaster, I'm a libertarian. Like I have all kinds of, I've diversified my emotional portfolio, and, you know, politics has its right place. And that's what the grill pill is about. It is about saying, I'm not like, you know, this a big part of it was this podcast by Tucker Max and Jeffrey Miller called, how mate, I forget what it was, like What Women Want or something. But they did this podcast called Mating Grounds, and it was like, why aren't you getting women? Well, because you don't have a good job, you can't pay your bills, you play too many video games, you're fat, you're not taking care of yourself, you're like, right? Like, why does society suck? Because you're not taking care of yourself physically, you're not reading books, you're not engaging in your community to where you know the needs of your community are, so that you can help solve those right? Like, we have to take personal responsibility and stop blaming the libs. It's not the libs and the cons and Trump and everybody else's fault. It's our fault. We can get better, and we can do it. We can do this, everybody.
Well, yeah. At the end of the day, it's all just different flavors of socialism, right? Some people want to socialize the economy, and some people want to socialize virtue. But at the end of the day, you know, if there's a libertarian insight Christians could really get away from, or really come away with, it's that central planning and socialism doesn't work in any of those venues. So, Chris, that was wonderful. I think I don't have much to add to that. I thought you closed us out really well. And
you gotta interview
really
podcasters. So when you have podcasters on your show, you don't have to do anything, Jacob. You just let them roll.
Exactly. You know, where can people find your old and small but not too small podcast to listen to you ramble some more?
You know, we're still a few hundred listeners an episode. Yeah, we're still plugging along over at the Chris Spangle Show. You can look up Chris Spangle. We also have Liberty Explained, A History of Modern Politics, Boss Hog of Liberty. You can listen to Jacob on old episodes of Enemy of My Enemy. Yeah,
please don't. Please. Okay, a couple of them were okay, but oh man, talk about if you want to hear me at the times of life that I was referencing for comparison's sake. Yes, absolutely.
You can go to chris-spangle.com, find all my projects. But yeah, we're going to be starting a series on principles of liberty, and I've got a bunch mapped out, and we'll get into more some of the stuff I've talked about today, a little more systematized over time. So check it out. I'd love for you to come over, and if you got questions, you're more than welcome to DM me. I'm happy to talk with you if you feel like you need somebody to talk to. Just find me, Chris Spangle, on any social media platform. I'm unfortunately too available and there too often.
You have become all things to all people.
And nothing to myself.
Yeah, oh gosh.
Thus is the grill pill, is recapturing what is important in your life.
I'm actually going to say the grill pill is just it's sphere sovereignty, but for the individual, right?
It's exactly right.
It's sphere sovereignty is the proper ordering of society, and the grill pill is the proper ordering of yourself. So
100%.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks everybody for listening and all your comments. Sorry I didn't get a chance to give to. I'll try to put as many up as I could. But the one I forgot to highlight, which I'll just say here, yes, we are back on Rumble. Some of you really like Rumble. I despise it. I despise how hard it is as a podcaster to stream to Rumble, because it's just not easy, and I can't do one click. But you know, as a good capitalist, enough of you bugged me enough, and I'm giving you what you want. So for those of you that would rather watch,
you've got back watching The Lord of the Ree.
Yeah. But yeah, we are on Rumble for those of you who prefer to watch on there. I forgot to say that earlier, but yeah, that's all we have for you guys today. I'll be back here, of course, next Monday with another stream. Make sure you're subscribed. Give this video a thumbs up wherever you're watching. 5-star reviews, again, always help. You can check out more about what we do at libertarianchristians.com. And yeah, as I always conclude by saying, live at peace and live for Christ. Take care.